We're living in truly prophetic times, y'all. The news just came out because they discovered an ancient mosaic in Israel that proves Jesus is God. We found this very ancient mosaic that was just discovered going back to the year 200 that declares directly that Jesus is God. A source that's outside the Bible, outside the New Testament, outside of early Christian writings, whatever. We have a concrete, just historical attestation that equates Jesus to God. I'm going to read the article now. The inscription was found by an inmate at an Israeli prison. The earliest inscription of Jesus is God has been discovered beneath the floor of a prison in Israel. This engraving, which is said to be 1800 years old, was found by an inmate at the Megiddo prison. The mosaic floor, which has been hidden under the prison since its discovery in 2005, is now on display in a museum in Washington, D.C. until 2025. The 581 square foot mosaic features the ancient Greek writing, "The God-loving Akeptus has offered the table to God Jesus Christ as a memorial." Let me say that again. The God-loving Akeptus has offered the table to God Jesus Christ as a memorial. It also features images of fish, which experts say may reference the story of Luke 9:16, where Jesus multiplied 2 fish to feed 5,000 people. The CEO of the Museum of the Bible in Washington hailed the mosaic as the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. I want y'all to peep this. This is the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. This isn't just another amulet or ancient artifact discovered in Israel, which I've also made videos on in the past. You feel me? This is the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you peep in biblical archaeology at all, you know how significant that is, because we have a concrete source by 200 years AD that concretely saw Jesus Christ as God before anything became firmly articulated at the Council of Nicaea and anything like that. At the opening of the exhibition, he said, "We truly are among the first people to ever see this, to experience what almost 2,000 years ago was put together by a man named Brucius, the incredible craftsman who laid the flooring here." Other experts at the museum said this was the most important archaeological discovery for understanding the early Christian church. So we have different people weighing in and saying this is the most important archaeological discovery for how what the church believed from the very beginning, as well as just the greatest biblical discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is no small discovery. Please understand. Curator Algerie Savagrero added, "The mosaic presents groundbreaking physical evidence of the practices and beliefs of the early Christians, including the first archaeological instance of the phrase God Jesus Christ." God Jesus Christ. So we have the first instance of the phrase God Jesus Christ, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting way to articulate the divinity of Christ. There's a lot of stuff I could go into because there's a lot of connections even to the ways the ancient African churches refer to Christ and all that stuff, but that's a conversation for another day. This is where it gets interesting. The Megiddo mosaic was first found in 2005 in the Jezreel Valley during the expansion of a maximum security prison. The valley is thought to be the location where the final battle of the biblical Armageddon will occur. Now I want y'all to understand, because this is why I said we're living in prophetic times. In Jezreel Valley, where Armageddon is said to happen, we found this ancient mosaic that everyone is saying is the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls, which concretely calls Jesus God Jesus Christ. The God-fearing individual made this table to God Jesus Christ in the year 200 in Israel. The mosaic includes the name of the Roman officer who commissioned it, which reads, "Gnaeus, a Roman officer, having sought honor from his own money, has made the mosaic." Archaeologists also found a Roman camp nearby. These discoveries led researchers to believe they could serve as proof of coexistence between Romans and Christians during the Roman occupation of Judea. So during this time, Israel was still occupied by the Romans, just like in Jesus' time. So the fact that we're having this declaration of Jesus' divinity suggests to me that it's either these are either Jewish Christians or they're possibly Gentile Christians, because we know that the phrase God-fearer is used in the Bible. It's in the New Testament. It's one of the ways that the people would describe Gentiles who were sort of interested in the God of Israel. They would be called God-fearers. So when it says the God-fearer Asclepius, or whatever his name was, it's possible that this is someone who lived in Israel and, was familiar with the Old Testament, was familiar with the God of the Bible, and then came to see Christ as God as well. But I think there's very likely there's some familiarity with the Old Testament and with Yahweh and the God of the Bible from this individual. When I saw this, man, when I first saw this, I got so excited. You feel me? The same excitement you feel when you got a girl or a female that mess with you. I felt after I read this discovery, because I mean the meaning of this is so insane, because this coincides with what Christians have always been saying, that there's the apostolic message, the apostolic declaration of who Christ is, and as things develop, then you get formal articulations that are used as metrics for orthodoxy, which later become the Trinity or the Selassie. You feel what I'm saying? But so we've always been saying that this has always been believed before it was ever articulated at the Council of Nicaea. Feel me? And this is just concrete historical proof, because you can't get any more clearer than the phrase God, Jesus Christ. And that corresponds directly to places like Hebrews 1, where Jesus is directly called God, or even John 1:1. The Word was in the beginning with God and was God. So when we have these discoveries from very early on, in the year 200, it encourages us to look at the New Testament, which was written in like the 40s and the 50s, and in some cases 70s and 80s and 90s, to take that message at face value, because this stuff that comes later corroborates the face value tradition of what we get from the beginning. And this is what I want to say. This is where I want to pause, because in the black community, I engage with a lot of Israelites, and I see that certain Israelite sects don't believe that the Messiah is divine. They proclaim just a human Christ. But what people don't realize is that anyone who proclaims just a human Christ is actually detached from who Christ truly is Hebraically. Because what this does is that it confirms the apostolic testimony. It confirms what the apostles were really saying, when we have concrete proof of what early Christians believed before it was ever articulated as the Trinity or as the Selassie. Let me break that down. When we think about these things from the original context of these ancient Israelites in the Second Temple period, while the temple was still standing, they believed that this figure that exists categorically has revealed. The Bible teaches a divine Messiah. We could understand that the way stars were understood to be divine beings, and different scholars have done work on that in the ancient Near East. So when the Old Testament predicts that the Messiah will be a star, at face value, that means the Messiah will be divine. So they believe that this figure which exists is come in Christ, and it's not just that. If you look in places like in John or in Hebrews, the Bible directly connects Jesus to God's visible appearance to the early saints. So when the Lord, the Most High, directly appeared to the old saints visibly, there are verses in the New Testament that directly connect Jesus to that figure. Like in, I think, John chapter 12. So what that shows is that they come to believe that this figure which exists and has this whole prehistory with Israel has concretely revealed himself in Jesus, in Yeshua. And that coincides with prophecies we've been studying about how at face value, God's kingdom said it would start in the days of Rome, and how at face value, God says he would divinely visit the temple. There will be a divine visitation to the temple. So when we take these prophecies at face value, what the apostles came to believe in the context of their original culture aligns perfectly with that. Because we know it's not merely just a human Messiah. It's not merely just a human king that God has in store. So when they came to believe these things about Christ, they're saying that this figure, which we not only acknowledge to exist, but we know has a whole history of meeting with the Israelites. Various times God appeared to them in human visible form. We believe has concretely revealed himself in Jesus of Nazareth. So that allows us to look at the Hebraic stuff, which corresponds to the initial proclamation of Christ by the apostles. And what you have happen is you have all these nations and all these Gentile tribes come to believe in the God of Israel on account of that belief. You feel what I'm saying? So you have all these different nations and all these different people in the Roman Empire and in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa who are now coming to concretely acknowledge the God of Israel by the belief that this figure who has a history of appearing to the Israelites in their own scriptures, has fully revealed himself in Yeshua. By the belief that this figure who exists and has a history has revealed himself in Jesus, these people who were once alienated from God are now coming to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. On the proclamation of Christ, the belief of this figure has come that the apostles were proclaiming. So what this shows is that the period between the original apostles and the Council of Nicaea shows that they were already confessing that Jesus is God. This was a belief of what we've always been saying, that the divinity of Christ was taught by the apostles, and it was believed before it became articulated as the Trinity. So as things go on, you have these different cultures, you get different articulations of what the apostles taught, of what the Hebrew scriptures teach about the nature of God. And this is where we get the Trinity, or the Trinitas in Latin. So now we get another layer, because now you have this belief, and as time goes on, you get different, specifically ancient Africans, who start to articulate the nature of God. And this is where we get things like the Trinity in Latin, or the Selassie in Ge'ez, which is a native Ethiopian language. So we got all these different articulations of the apostolic doctrine, of what goes back to what these apostles in Israel believed about this figure that was promised to them. So before everything was so nicely defined and articulated, we have a group of Jews who believe that this figure has come to them, corresponding to the face value understanding of their own prophets. And as different nations come to embrace the God of Zion on account of this proclamation, these different nations, well, now we're getting different people grafted in, these different people acknowledging the God of Israel, and they're starting to articulate as time goes on how exactly his nature exists. And when you get articulations of the nature of God, we get these ancient Africans who articulate the Trinity in Latin, these ancient Africans who hold fast to this when other ideologies are being pushed. And that gets us into the conversation and the value of looking at church history and seeing how, not just as a byword, but how actual historical proof on how ancient Africa was really the cornerstone in many ways of the ancient church, in terms of these different tribes, Berber tribes, sub-Saharan tribes, coming to believe and articulate what the apostles proclaimed before that sort of became a standard for the church at the Council of Nicaea. So not only can we see people believe that Jesus is God and people believe in the Trinity before Nicaea, we have concrete proof that even before the term Trinity was used, people believed in the Godhood of Christ, which corresponds again to what the apostles would have been proclaiming. My whole point is, when you really study things Hebraically, you can see how consistent it is for the apostles to have believed this figure has come, because we know scripturally, the Hebrew scriptures, it is not just a human Messiah. So when we have the apostles believe that, God says he would divinely visit the temple, God says the Messiah will be like a star, God has visibly appeared to his people, and we recognize this. To believe all these things come together in Jesus within your own culture, you're letting the other tribes of Israel know, as that message spreads to the Gentiles, now you're having people in different languages and different tongues come to believe and over time articulate the nature of that. And that's where we get the Trinitas from brothers like Tertullian, and they later become the standard of how to articulate these things when you have bishops who actually depart from what the apostles taught. The fact that we have concrete proof of early Christians in Israel, the motherland, so to speak, calling Jesus God, shows that when you have bishops like Arius say that Jesus isn't truly God, now we have direct historical proof that that's alienation from the apostolic doctrine. That's going AWOL from the original apostolic doctrine. This is so exciting to me, because I'm so curious to see how this is going to be incorporated into future scholarship, and how future scholars are going to come to realize how early the divinity of Christ goes back to the apostolic community. I'm really excited to see how this archaeological discovery is going to play into that conversation, because I think that it's going to move in the right direction in a lot of ways. But that just goes to show that is so dope. And it just shows the validity of the apostolic message within the original Hebraic terms. But as different people come to believe in God on account of this belief, on account of this ancient Hebraic belief, then these different articulations in different languages, in the same way Hebrew is the holy tongue, as Gentiles and different tribes are grafted in, people who speak Latin, people who speak Ge'ez, people who speak Greek, now we get different articulations of this tradition that hold to what the apostles would have originally been proclaiming in Israel. The belief that this figure has come to Israel. Now these nations also believe this figure has come to Israel, and they believe in Israel's God because of it. And this is just corresponds the maintenance of that tradition from the apostles through the different churches in the empire while Israel is still occupied before the religion became legalized. And then you had everybody in all the different streams come to meet to define orthodoxy, which is where we get the Council of Nicaea and the Nicene Creed to use as a standard. But before all these things became developed and so articulated, we can see a clear tradition that goes back to the apostles. So if you don't take anything else away, understand that to deny the deity of Christ, to deny the Godhood of Christ, is actually to deny who he is Hebraically. Look at my ancient theology playlist. Look at my Messiah 2024 playlist. We can study all these different things that ancient Israelites before Christ and contemporaries of the apostles in the diaspora, among the scattered tribes, recognize the fundamental same things that the apostles recognized and came to believe were fulfilled in Christ, and later church leaders also came to believe and articulate. We can see they recognize these concepts like the triunity of God, like the complexity of God, that God can appear as a man. The children of the book recognize these things from their scriptures. So when we understand that, we can see the consistency when different people grafted in because of the belief that this figure has come, according to the ancient Jews, we know it is the apostles. Now they start to articulate these things. The idea is when we always go from the Hebraic rule outward and keep these principles and things in mind, we can be able to look and see those who hold to the testimony from the Hebraic root, where they believe that this figure, who is not merely just a human Messiah, and he couldn't just be a human Messiah, they believe came in Jesus, and the different nations, the objective effect Christ would have by those who hold to that testimony later on, and everything like that. So it's just awesome, because this is when we look at all the evidence in the New Testament, and the cultural context that just shows that the original apostles would have believed Jesus was God, this stuff corroborates that greatly. I recommend you look at The Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser. There's a lot of specific ancient Jewish material that shows how Christ, the way he's portrayed in the Bible, is to say he is the visible form of God. So when we have all that evidence connected to all of this ancient mosaic in Israel, in the Jezreel Valley, then that just corroborative testimony, because it shows that there's this tradition that Jesus is God. And if there's a tradition by the year 200 in Israel that Jesus is God, then that would lead us to believe that this was established beforehand. And that conversation corroborates what we've seen and what different scholars have seen when we look at the way ancient Jews thought about God and the way those concepts and verses are applied to Jesus. Really dope stuff. I know I'm talking fast, but this excited me, man. This put butterflies in my stomach. Because when you bring it out to its logical conclusion, it's what followers of Christ have always been saying. And we can see the role and the unity of the original Hebraic message and the different articulations of that message from ancient church leaders and fathers, namely ancient Africans, that then became a standard as the church developed. Which is where we can see the validity of things like the Trinity as articulations of the nature of God. So I pray that this can be a blessing. I'm going to link the article in the description. Y'all be blessed by the Most High, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.